Hey everybody. Quick follow-up from our Monday class. We'll be touching in review on some of the poems that we didn't discuss in our Zoom meeting. I had also intended to do a little intro video to Oscar Wilde's play The Importance of Being Earnest. I think in your syllabus it's labeled Decadence and Aestheticism, but I've since decided that that's just getting too detailed, too nuanced on the subject for the level of this course. The importance of being earnest, I'm going to give a few notes on that here now at the beginning, just to kind of make sure that you guys have got a bit of prep before we discuss it on Monday. And then I'll deal with some of the poetry stuff in review from Monday. The Importance of Being Earnest is a pretty short play in a lot of ways, like structurally speaking, in the terms of the way it, builds a story, plot arc and stuff like that. Blessedly simple, very traditional and tropey. There's sort of, it's a comedy of errors as much as it is a comedy of manners. Oscar Wilde, if you read the little introduction on him in your Norton anthology, he was a major figure of arts and letters during the late Victorian period. Some people describe him almost as pre-modernist because he does anticipate some elements of the modern movement. But as much as he was an incredibly accomplished literary figure, he was also kind of a persona. He was kind of a known personality in his time. Very gay. And I say that with affection, but when you look at pictures of Oscar Wilde online, photographs of him, with the long flowy hair and the fur, he's wearing this amazing coat with like a wide fur lapel type of situation. He's very flamboyant. It's tough to know if you're not familiar with the styles and fashions of the period, but like men, especially in Victorian England, just did not dress the way that you see Oscar Wilde dressing in a lot of his photographs. Nobody at that time was what you would describe as openly queer. But he was just about as openly queer as you could be without it all being open about it. The guy was signaling. People knew. Something you may also have read if you did a little background reading on him is that he was, at one point later in his life, arrested for, I don't know what they would have called it at that point, indecent liaisons or some nonsense like that. But he was arrested and imprisoned for a period of time for a love affair that he had with a male companion. And he wrote an incredible nonfiction piece during that time called De Profundis, or From the Depths. And wow. If you like Oscar Wilde's style, I mean, he's a man who kind of dipped his pen into every genre. We're reading one of his plays. His novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray, is very famous, very popular. And in terms of nonfiction, this piece, De Profundis, is also hugely influential. So if you dig Oscar Wilde, if you like what you read, if his character interests you, there are lots of places you can go in terms of digging deeper into his work. But the play, as I said, is, for what it is, very simple. The most difficult thing about The Importance of Being Earnest is also the most enjoyable thing about it, which is the witty one-liners, the wisecracks. The dialogue in this play is jam-packed with jokes. Oscar Wilde was a very gifted ironist. He was always kind of sending up what he considered the comic drama of regular life. He considered sort of society and public life to be a melodrama of absurdity in and of itself in a lot of ways. The strictures and high etiquette and high concerns of Victorian England, I think, to him were probably deep down, but, very oppressive and sad and brutal even. But the way he treated it was to just point out the absurdity in all of it and some of the silliness. He makes he makes these stereotypical shapes and tableaus of Victorian interactions so funny in The Importance of Being Earnest. At least I find it hilarious. I really look forward to discussing it with you. I did include information in the syllabus about a good film version that I hope you've been able to access. The thing about watching the 1952 film version of The Importance of Being Earnest is that, number one, it's word for word. If you've seen that, you've seen the play. And you haven't, missed out on any of the text. They didn't abridge it or change it, right? Like, it's really quite true to Oscar Wilde's written text. One of the drawbacks, of course, of just watching the movie would be that it's a British film produced in 1952. Their accents are very pronounced, and very antique and sometimes hard to understand because they can speak very quickly. And to some degree, the hammy, plummy accents make it funnier, like when Lady Bracknell finds out that Jack was found as a baby in a purse in a train station, when she goes, a handbag, like it's just so, everything is at 10 all the time. And it's fun to be able to see in the film, but it may be difficult to pick up on all the dialogue that is very fast, very rapid fire. So you may want to turn on subtitles, or again, that's just the benefit of reading the text, where you can kind of take your time and go, wait a minute, does that mean what I think it means? Is that a joke? Yes, it is. Always. If you're asking yourself, is that what I think it is? It is. And sometimes it's even shadier or raunchier, or sillier than you think it is. Like when the two young ladies are having tea, when Cecily and Gwendolen are having tea, and much like Algernon foretold, they never call each other sister until they've called each other a lot of other things first. I asked for bread and butter, and you have given me cake. And she's so offended. Anyway, I could go on. But all that to say, I do recommend the film. It really gives you a sense of the high drama, the flamboyance of what's trying to be conveyed in the script when you read the script of the play. Ooh, sorry, apologies. But again, for sake of really picking up on all the jokes and digesting the humor of the content and some of the political commentary, for those purposes, I really do recommend, making your way through the written text at your own pace. That is, I think, really all I have to say about The Importance of Being Earnest. Coming up to our discussion of it, it's a great example of how plays at this time, they are becoming more and more cinematic, right? Very, very, very late into the 19th, early into the 20th century, the technology of film is soon going to be invented, and there will be a period of overlap where plays and movies are really not at all that different from one another. And, then those things will begin to diverge a little. But this comedy by Oscar Wilde really is kind of a slice of life, portrait of society, comedy of manners, comedy of errors, that is a good reflection, not only of the norms of the Victorian period, but also the dissenting attitudes against the norms of that period that some artists were putting forward at the time. And it's just a lot of fun. Coming back to a review of some of the poetry that we covered on Monday, I had intended to do kind of a really intense play-by-play in this video of the other two Gerard Manley Hopkins poems. On Monday we discussed As Kingfishers Catch Fire, and I'm glad we did because theologically quite sophisticated, grammatically really tough. I would say Kingfishers is probably the hardest of the three Gerard Manley Hopkins poems that we have on our syllabus. But I did have one student write into me afterwards and say, I want to work on As Kingfishers Catch Fire for the assignment. And for that reason, I have not watched your discussion of it in the Zoom class because I want to try and understand it myself and form my own ideas and analysis of it independently of being told what it means. which is brilliant. I'm so, so glad that student made the choice that they did and wrote in to notify me. I think for that reason, I'm not going to speak about God's grandeur or pied beauty. But if, for any of you who are working on either of those poems, if you are looking for some insight on the trickier bits in the poem, if you want to, just write me an email and say, hey, this is what I thought this section is intended to mean. Am I on the right track? Is there something else that I'm missing? If you want to discuss your process as you're working on these poems, by all means, send me questions, send me ideas that you have. I think I'm taking it in this direction so far, happy to discuss. Don't feel just because I haven't done the blow by blow breakdown of them in lecture format that we can't discuss them. I would like that very much, to be able to discuss your projects with you. So that being the case, having kind of decided to leave Gerard Manley Hopkins alone a little bit for the benefit of your investigative process, we covered My Last Duchess in pretty good scope, I think, last time. The discussion post that I put up incorporates considerations for several of the other poems. So I think if you're looking to process some of the other poems that we didn't talk about on Monday, looking at the discussion post would be a good way to do that. But I did promise that we would look at Pauline Johnson, our first Canadian poet. She was partly of European descent and partly of Iroquois descent. Her poem, Lullaby of the Iroquois, is something that I promised I would discuss. So let's take a quick look at it. Emily Pauline Johnson she's very much a Victorian poet. She was a product of her time, socially, culturally. She had a performance career as a poet where she sort of took on this, what she would have described as an Indian princess, very sort of indigenized for public consumption performance persona. She had a persona like that she took on for public readings and performances and things like that. Just completely lost my train of thought. Why did I mention that? Oh, yes, right. No, but because her that persona that she took on would have been heavily influenced by the norms and voyeurism and appetites and prejudices of the day, the state of colonialism, the state of racism, or at least race intrigue. Exoticism is the word I'm looking for. Her performative life would have been really steeped in all of those dynamics. But the texts of her poems, I think, are less embroiled in some of that performativity, which is really quite lovely. The reason that I included her poem, Lullaby of the Iroquois, on our course, aside from just wanting to include, a poem by this awesome early Canadian poet, is that it prioritizes images and subject matter and subjects, people, topics, contexts that you don't see a lot of in other poetry on our course or even, of the period. This is a 100% totally and completely motherly poem. It is, maternal. It's feminine in a unique way that doesn't get a whole lot of airtime on our course. The structure of the poem, the rhythms and line lengths and specific repetitions are so well adapted to an actual lullaby. When you read this poem, you can imagine not only possibly setting it to music and singing it to a baby, if you yourself have ever had the task of trying to convince a baby who does not want to sleep that it's time to sleep. I think you'll find in this lullaby, there's a sense of like, oh, she knows. She's done the work. It has even almost a physicalized sense of the motions that you have to dig yourself down into in order to try and coax a baby to sleep. I'm going to read the poem out loud just to give us a sense of its texture and scope and dynamics, and we'll talk a little bit more about it shortly. So this is Lullaby of the Iroquois by Emily Pauline Johnson. Little brown baby bird lapped in your nest, wrapped in your nest, strapped in your nest. Your straight little cradle board rocks you to rest. Its hands are your nest, its bands are your nest. It swings from the down-bending branch of the oak. You watch the camp flame, arid the curling gray smoke. But oh, for your pretty black eyes, sleep is best. Little brown baby of mine, go to rest. Little brown baby bird, swinging to sleep, winging to sleep, singing to sleep. Your wonder black eyes that so wide open keep, shielding their sleep, unyielding to sleep. The heron is homing, the plover is still. The night owl calls from his haunt on the hill. Afar the fox barks, afar the stars peep. Little brown baby of mine, go to sleep. It almost physically rocks you, like you almost can't read that poem without rocking yourself. It's so deep down in the rhythmic norms of this form, and I think it's very accomplished that way. Sometimes in poetry, when a meter or a rhythm is too regular, too tidy, it can feel kind of plodding and square and unmusical, not very elegant. This poem has a very regular, very deeply grooved meter, but it has just enough variances that it stays musical, it stays light, you know, the images being described here of this beautiful, dark-skinned child, and this is one of the things that I love about it. So many of our poems, because they are so English, they celebrate whiteness as a matter of default, right? That when celebrating human beauty, they are celebrating whiteness because English people were in general white, or because whiteness was all that English artists saw or considered worthy of celebration. I could drink in the refreshing sounds of celebrating a little brown baby bird, you know, the incredible love and wonder of this mother looking at her Iroquois daughter, you know, saying, your wonder black eyes. She has deep dark eyes, not blue sparkly eyes. They are wonder black. And she's such a sweet, soft brown that she's like a little brown sparrow, a little baby bird. This is not at all the exoticism of description that we see in Afraben's Orinoco. This is not... there is a word that starts with E. It's not exploitative, this description. It is so celebratory. Anyway, it's one of the things that I observe in this poem that I really love. So that image of this little baby bird in a nest is overlaid on top of another image, you know, for which it is metaphorical, the image of this little Iroquois baby in her papoose, which Megan was kind enough to remind us of on Monday in class. A papoose was a specific kind of, well, it was a carrier, basically. It was a baby carrier. And it could be worn on the body, you know, when you're going about your life, you know, walking here and there and doing stuff, much like contemporary baby carriers. but it could also be a portable cradle, basically, a portable way of putting the baby down to sleep in like almost hammock fashion, right? You could wrap this baby up tight, swaddle style. When you put the papoose down, it's got a flat board. Your straight little cradle board rocks you to rest. That's what it is. It's got a flat board on the bottom. Baby goes down on the board, face up, and then there are soft wrappings that swaddle the baby up against that board, and then thongs or strings that tie over the wrappings all the way up, almost like shoelaces, so that baby is super secure, head is really stable, giving themselves just a gorgeous hug like they love to do. And you can hang it up, as in the same way that you would tie it to your body. You could hang it up anywhere, from a tree branch or whatever, in the fire circle where everybody's camped out, and it would just rock in the breeze, right? That dangling sensation is so much like being in the womb. It's so much like what an infant would have experienced before birth. Really fabulous. My mom, as it happens, is was for a long time a public health nurse on a local Indigenous reserve, and she mentioned to me that a lot of the young mums on the reserve still choose to put their babies down in more or less this way when they're really young. They still go with the hammock approach. That was an Anishinaabe reserve, so I don't know if their hammocks or hanging cradles are exactly the same as these, but there were variants in a similar approach. So you've got this bird in the nest metaphor that's sort of secondarily portraying this little baby in her papoose. And the rhythms of the poem in some ways reflect the stability and security of the papoose, and also the mobility of it, the way it dangles, the way it sways. When you look at the relationship between the long lines and the short lines, when you see where a rhythm that has been sustained over a long time alters or turns or breaks up, it's almost like you can imagine a mother who's been pacing the room and she's done the long bounce across the long end of the room with her baby, and then she corners a little bit to do the long bounce back down the long end of the room. Many of you I know have done this. So having sort of unpacked all that, I'm going to read a couple of stanzas here again. Little brown baby bird lapped in your nest, wrapped in your nest, strapped in your nest. Your straight little cradle board rocks you to rest. Its hands are your nest, its bands are your nest. It swings from the down-bending branch of the oak. You watch the camp flame. There's a little tweak in the iambic pentameter there. It swings from the down-bending branch of the oak. You watch the camp flame, arid the curling gray smoke. There's this, that's where it is, right? That's where you get that bit of variation that breaks up what would otherwise be a very deep, straight, square, repetitious rhythm. She does a little bit of a wobble, and you can almost tell that that's where the baby's fighting sleep, like the rhythm isn't quite working. It's still rhythmic, it's still beautiful, but, the baby is fighting sleep, and mom is going, come on, you can do it, close your eyes. Because here her eyes are open, right? You watch the camp flame. Arid, the curling gray smoke, it stings your eyes, Close your little eyes, go to sleep, darling. Your straight little cradle board rocks you to rest. Its hands are your nest, its bands are your nest. It swings from the down-bending branch of the oak. You watch the camp flame, arid the curling gray smoke. Right back into that rhythm, right back in there. But oh, for your pretty black eyes, sleep is best. Little brown baby of mine, go to rest. Next verse. Gorgeousness. The last thing I will say about this poem, which I think is really quite lovely, in the modernist period, when we do our poetry readings from there, we will talk about a movement called imagism, which was a product of realism that's really gaining ground here in the Victorian movement, And realism was an aesthetic movement that focused on conveying clear, crisp images of ordinary, everyday objects and scenes without embellishment in average language, colloquial terms, right? No high diction or fancy, florid words. Just using the economy and grace and creativity of poetry to convey simple, clear, vivid images of ordinary things, often in a very brief space of time. That's imagism. This poem is quite evidently a precursor to imagism. Pauline Johnson is here kind of anticipating the Imagist school of poetry that will be put forward by poets like Ezra Pound, Amy Lowell, William Carlos Williams, and others. I really hope that you enjoyed this poem. I hope that you enjoyed its observant quality. I hope you enjoyed the the difference that it makes from some of our content and some of our, the predominating visual or mental focuses of a lot of our other content. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to chatting over the importance of being earnest with you on Monday.